The annual State of the Union address to Congress outlines the current state of the United States as a nation domestically and internationally. Today, we do the same for beef and ranching. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen. My co-host and father is Brandon. If you enjoy what we provide on this channel, please take a moment to hit the like button, and while you're at it, subscribe. All right, with that, the beef industry in the market as of January 8th, 2023. Thus begins the monologue with our new format of a once-a-month discussion with no time limit on this channel. Instead of our weekly 1-hour topics, we hope to get into more in-depth and important analysis of ranching topics. Today, we'll cover the state of the beef industry and U.S. ranching. But for us to begin, here we go. 2022 was a year full of ups and downs. According to some experts, it was in the articles cited in the description below, it was a mixed bag. The question is, will 2023 be the same or different? The USDA claims the beef industry is the most important agriculture sector in the U.S. That was dated September of 2022. For 2022, we produced the most amount of beef in the world. As the number one beef producer, we provided 21.5% of all beef within the world. The next two nations, Brazil and China, produced 17.4% and 12% respectively. Looking at those numbers, it wasn't even close. To continue, prices of cattle were up. Things are looking better on the historical beef industry 10-year cycle, anywhere between 8 to 12 years historically. We're coming out of a trough and slowly making our way back to a peak. New record exports to China assisted in boosting the stats in the export department. If you're looking to maximize profits, the sales of breeding stock, heifers and older cows, is at an all-time high currently. And finishing out 2022, there are research opportunities to turn agricultural waste into bio-friendly products. That was all the good that came from 2022. Now the bad, inflation. As a nation, prices are closing in on a place where we personally saw amazing returns to our ranch in 2024 in terms of the cattle sales. That's it. However, the story of 2022 was inflation. Those inflated inputs reduced or completely removed any profits that were expected this year. Additionally, drought continued from 2021. The combination of higher inputs and continued environmental challenges have forced us and many others across the Western and Plains countries of the United States to sell the breeding stock that I alluded to earlier. What does that mean? Less beef for coming years. Prices may be increasing, but why? Supply and demand. If people are able to survive with smaller herds, they're hoping to rebuild in the later years. This plan does not bode well for small ranches. Honestly, it looks better for moguls ready to expand. If we're not careful, we may be witnessing an end to a free market beef industry in the United States. We spoke about exports, now imports. Also a record high. Not a good look for our industry. Most of the imports came from Brazil. And don't forget, when there was an issue with mad cow coming from that nation, we still brought it in. While the US dollar strengthened globally, it made beef more expensive for other nations and ourselves. Therefore, buying outside our borders was not only more efficient for other nations, it was also more efficient for our market as well. Remember those higher prices? Now, if we look at what has transpired over the last 8 years in 2022, we will see why it is good news, but does not assist the local producer. The dollar may be stronger, but it means we have seen decreases in U.S. sales. Thankfully, the desire to obtain beef for meals remains high, but people simply cannot afford to continue to do so at the prices shown at the store. Prices ranchers get less and less cuts from. In February 2022, nearly a year ago, the White House shared that the ranchers got 60 cents on every consumer dollar spent on beef 50 years ago. That was 1972, and it's down to 39 cents today. While consumers pay more, we see less, which drives many out of production. 2022's inflation skyrocketed inputs. Just in feed alone, Iowa State University estimated total feed costs per head for finishing a 760-pound yearling steer before it's been butchered in March of 2022 at $1,802.58. According to Iowa State, feed costs account for 24% of the total cost of production for 2022, and that brought the break-even price for $138.66 for every 100 pounds on the animal, which was up 12.8% from 2021. Finally, I'll leave the subject of money with this: time value of money. If you understand it, the dollars we see in 2020 and 2014, we may be approaching shortly. That's awesome. We'll see the same prices we did 8 years ago. However, that same price does not provide the purchasing power it did less than a decade ago. That money we used to buy 100 tons of hay may now only buy us 70 tons of hay, assuming hay prices were not so ridiculous. Every year, our dollar buys less and less than it did the years before. If we state the prices are coming back, that means ranchers are still at a disadvantage because they are simply buying with yesterday's money and getting those 39 cents compared to yesteryear's 60. All I just stated was provided by sources cited below in the description. Now I'll share the on-the-ground look from the ranchers. I'll give you 3 assessments: foes of the beef industry and ranching, where the beef industry is moving, and finally, the beef industry's state in the U.S. and global markets. 3 of the 4 items I will describe as foes. The 4th is simply a challenge. APR, or American Prairie Reserve, plant-based proteins, and monopolies within the beef production are all foes of our world. The 4th is outsiders moving into our world. Let's begin with the challenge. We are from Montana, our state in the top 10 highest growing states of 2022. The influx of people is removing agriculture ground from the industry, whether people realize it or not. It's difficult to explain to people, but we do our best every chance we get. More ground placed under subdivisions or newer additions to towns takes away precious hay ground, grazing land, crop production, etc. This challenge continues to force beef producers to become more and more efficient with the things we have available to us. The APR, American Prairie Reserve, plant-based proteins, and beef packer monopolies we have discussed here before, but their threat has yet to cease. All 3 present systematic avenues to reduce our role within the United States beef industry, and worse yet, our heritage. Between greed, influence, and misinformation, all 3 have gone about destroying the beef industry as systematically as possible, and we must remain vigilant and fight back through information and education, coupled with grassroots movements and policy change. Understanding our state from last year and now understanding the mountains we must tunnel through, traverse around, or climb over, we now look to the future. The direction of the beef industry is twofold. We have lost ranches. The challenge of outsiders and money readily available made ranches look at budgets and realize they could no longer afford not to sell. Additionally, higher and higher inputs forced anyone with money available to look even more attractive to the standard business. Less revenue, more overhead simply spells out the future of our industry if things do not change. One of those changes is a grassroots movement thousands are beginning to try, and we're doing it too. Direct beef to consumer sales. We are one of many participating in this. It is efficient and more inexpensive for consumers while providing more cents to the dollar for us, the producers. To successfully combat the foes and challenges outlined, this is our way forward. This is our future. The state of beef in the U.S. and globally. Internationally, we're looking good. We continue to outproduce other nations incisively. We are efficient, our infrastructure is growing, and we continue to produce quality items at the store year after year. We are leading the world in how to produce beef and doing it better than any other nation. Domestically, we struggle to handle the influences of greedy, power-hungry monopolies that have taken advantage of the American people and the system. We are improving our outlook with the continuous historical cycle, but we still face concerns with an industry that is slowly disintegrating from its foundation. If we're not careful, the beef industry is likely to crumble in the coming decades if things do not change drastically. It is my stance that while beef production in the U.S. for global consumption is continuing to stay at the forefront of every aspect of agriculture, it is wobbling here at home. We have a future and a way forward, but I am unsure if we will come to fruition in time. So overall, we are prepared to feed the world, but possibly not the United States, and all at the expense of the 92% of producers. So with that, I will hand it to Dad.
Well, you put bullet points out there that I have to talk about an hour on each one. That's probably not a good idea. The first thing that comes to my mind is as you're talking, and I read some of the bullet points, literally, from some of the sources that you had cited, because this was a longer conversation. Normally we don't collaborate ahead of time too much. And this format will probably change that a little bit. Hopefully it'll give more in depth, but the comment of the USDA, I think, was that, boy, you guys are doing a great job. Just keep it up.
The one that I highlighted in red.
Yeah.
It upset me.
I worked for a very large oil company, and they would always tell you, oh my God, you guys, your family comes first. You never forget, this place will keep running, but your family comes first. When your family has needs, you need to be there. Well, guess who came in last? It was always everybody's family, because they would do unbelievable things in the way of emotional terrorism is what I called it, to keep you at work, and keep you there, and they didn't give squat about your family. So you fast forward that to where we're at now. You guys just keep working. You're doing a great job. We can't afford to lose you. What happens if we do lose out? Then what?
Right.
And then you have to go way back again into the 1700s in a small little burg called France, when people were starving to death. And what was the attitude of Marie Antoinette? What was her famous line?
Yeah, if they can't, what was it? If they can't eat bread, just give them cake, or
Just
something
give
to
them
that
cake.
effect.
Yeah, it's like, well, if they've got no bread, just let them eat cake.
Yeah.
Completely out of touch with what's really going on. And these are your hierarchies. These are the people that control what's going on, and
Well,
they just
and
want to
to
keep
kind of
that machine going. They
add what
don't
you're
want.
saying to that, though, I highlighted three things in red because they really popped out to me, and it was, these were quotes from either the USDA or the Secretary of the Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, and the first one was opportunity to spur economic activity in the nation's rural areas while lowering commercial risks. This was talking about biodegradable fuels and resources. Hey, I'm all about it. But the way that that was said, it was to make an opportunity for the economy while making us assume the risk.
Exactly.
And that really upset me. The second one was where agricultural resources are harvested, consumed, and regenerated in a sustainable manner. Okay, so you're assuming we're not trying to do that already?
Right.
Like, what are you talking about, man? And then this was a very absolute direct quote of what Tom Vilsack said. He said, "We must support and incentivize practices like these because it is what consumers want and what farmers and our planet need." Wow. So you're going to tell me what I need to do? Again, you're assuming I'm not doing this in the first place, but now you think that you're better than me, and that's exactly what you're going to do. And those were the things that really irked me.
And again, and the word incentivize, what does that mean?
Yeah.
That means you're going to do it my way, or you're going to go broke.
Yep. Exactly.
And we will force you to take these. Open your mouth, because we're going to cram it down your gulliga zipper. And whether you like it or not, in the meantime, you're trying to do what you've always done. And I don't think anybody on the planet builds cattle for consumption better than the U.S. You've got some other smaller countries, but nobody does it in the volume and with the resource.
I was saying the efficiency.
And the efficiency that we
the
have.
way we are able to use nearly 100% of the cow with all of the things within it to make other things like glue, and even, believe it or not, things like fireworks, like all the stuff that we're able to take and use from that animal. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, that's right. So they're gonna reinvent the wheel again, and put another name on it. The biodiversity. What does that mean? What is, they make up names, or they hijack names of things that sound good and put a different actual meaning to them, or they mean nothing. They're gibberish, in order to force you as a producer to either cut back and go broke, or to do things their way in order to try to make more money. And that's the hard part. You're really only faced one way. You don't really have much of a decision. You can't do what the government wants you to do and make money. Probably as good as we are at producing cattle as an industry, they are as bad at managing anything they touch. The government never is efficient about anything.
Well, we've talked about that before, and I think it's because the government doesn't actually have to follow a budget. That's the problem.
Well, they don't have the know-how. They don't have the skills or the knowledge in how to really do something,
Right.
but they've got the ability to tell you what an outcome they want to have. Well,
Yeah.
that the two of them are not um, necessarily aligned, and seldom are. So, and it's about who's in power, who's the ones who are making decisions, and how they can affect what you do.
Well, and I was flying back a couple of days ago to Kentucky from home, and I saw a TED talk. It was about how to influence followers, or how to be an influential leader, and it's by a guy by Simon Sinek. If anybody's ever seen him, he's got some great stuff. And he brought up kind of that thing was, the Wilbur, or sorry, the Wright brothers. Everybody says you have to have three things. You have to have um all the manpower you need, all the capital you need, and all the support you need to be able to get any project done, right? Like those are really the three things within an organization.
Mhm.
And he said the Wright brothers had none of that. They just did it on their own. Whereas this other guy, I don't remember what his name was, and that was part of the point too. He goes, "You've never heard of him because he never became famous." He was supported by the federal government. He had all the people he had and the support of a nation behind him to get whatever he needed to find out how to make something fly. And 2 days after the Wright brothers reported that they were able to get the first flight in North Carolina, he quit. And that's the thing is, he can't manage it even with all this stuff. Like, it's funny how the small producers with nothing seem to be able to outproduce anything, but anything with the amount of support and capital at their disposal.
92% of the industry.
Right.
Right. So there are a couple of things. I mean, there's many things to talk about here. I don't even know if we'll have time, but we'll make our best shot
It's
at it.
unlimited, man. We can stay as
Yeah.
long as we want.
Well, I just got done feeding cows a little bit ago, and I got to go stage hay too. So it never quits. See, it's a Sunday, and it never quits for us. And that's okay. That's a lifestyle we choose. I'm not an indentured servant. I don't think, but
Yeah.
yeah, these talks make you realize that, yeah, maybe we are. Um, the comments and the statistics you had, and the actual hard numbers of um, shortly after you started your monologue, beef prices are up. Yes, they are, but they don't outpace the cost of inflation.
And that was
And
the time value of money
time
concept I was
value of
trying
money,
to explain.
exactly
Yeah.
right. And that's and what is inflation? That's what it is, right? So but how does that occur? And that's what we don't have any control of. If you have a State of the Union in our industry where this is where things are at, if you're running a business, this is a trajectory we need to hit. This is how we're going to do it. We've got no control over that. We've got, as you said, basically the monopolies are our biggest hurdle in the short term, and they are in the long term as well. So we've talked about them ad nauseum. The four largest meat packers, they control those markets, um, and they continue to suppress the markets by being part of the supply chain themselves. So
Right.
they can pick and choose who they're going to box out or
Which
not
again,
pay.
so JBS is already Brazilian owned.
All right.
So to be surprised that Brazil is trying to increase its place within the production does not surprise me whatsoever.
All right. Well, and so, but when you control that, you control everything else, and we do not control our market. Um, and there's been periods of time. I remember in the 70s, there was a big drive into Washington D.C. with a bunch of farmers. I mean, they clogged D.C. with tractors, making a statement about they needed parity. That was the big word, parity. It's you know I do so much work, have so much things, and produce a product. It's worth this value. That's what I should be receiving for it, not less than. And that was the whole thing we're still talking about. Really, we haven't used the word parity in a long time, but it's really what it is. It's what is my value of what I have to produce based on my effort. And when you can't control that value, pretty soon you can't continue to produce.
Right.
And we've seen that many times around us, we've had to cut back on the number of cows, partially not to our fault of the market, but because of also the drought. So you're hit a different way, and then
Right.
you have pests, grasshoppers that add to that drought. So it's not all their fault, but if we had an even playing field there, we would be able to survive these dry years and the pestilence a whole lot easier, and probably come out even with less cattle because you're getting more for them because the markets are down. So that end just keeps getting suppressed harder and harder and harder. Would you
Well, and
say
that's
61 cents versus 39 cents
well, that's also why I brought up the whole supply
per
and demand
percent?
thing. That's what creates that flux is,
Yeah.
less and less. But yeah, let me pull it up real quick. I think it was 60 cents to now 39.
39.
Hold on. I just
Yeah.
added.
So cents on the
Yeah,
dollar or percent
60
as you
to
do it.
yeah, 60 to 39, which with time value money and inflation and how prices are returning to where they were 8 years ago, but they're the exact same price. It's not like they're adjusted for inflation. It's literally the exact same
Yes,
price. I
that's
would
right.
I would muster to say that you might be closer to 35 cents now, honestly.
It could
But
be. I don't know. I mean, it's changing extremely fast because of look how fast our inflation is right now. It's in the 80s. I thought it was bad. It's outpaced that.
yeah, I
I've
think
never
it's
seen
close.
it like
Well,
that.
that's why the Fed's been so
Aggressive,
aggressive because
right?
they've been watching such similar things that happened in the 70s and early 80s and then also in the 2008 era. And they're like, no, we have to buckle down on this immediately. Otherwise, we're going to watch this entire thing fold
It-
underneath of us.
you weren't around in the 70s, but
No.
guess what? The large driver for that inflation was we had no fuels.
Oh yeah.
People were rationed with fuel
Yeah.
and by
I've
your
seen
license
I've
plate
seen the
number.
news things of lines of people just
Yep.
trying to get gas. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And it's been done again. Only and this time it wasn't OPEC doing it. The Middle Eastern countries squeezing us. We've done it to ourselves
With our energy
with our energy policies.
right. Yep.
And so we're doing exactly the same thing. And that's what is a direct driver to the overhead costs. Now you're talking the other side of the markets now, where your overhead costs, you've got fuel, fertilizer, uh, nothing we do in industry is unconnected from fossil fuel and our energy. It has to be there. We have got to be able to put fertilizers on ground to be sustainable at the efficiency that we are now. Whether you agree with chemical fertilizers or not is kind of irrelevant. It's the production that it does get at this point.
Right.
And so you have to do something different. Every time you take another piece of ground out of production, it drives that end of it even further. So you've got this multi-spoked wheel of all of these different influences that cause some of the issues. Um, so we've got to be able to fill a pickup. Look how much fuel when you were home during Christmas time. Look how much fuel we burned.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't stop. You have got to feed these animals. And a really good wake up call is if you had to feed these animals by hand, and it was just a normal 50-degree day.
Which
Well,
we
we were at
did that.
50 below
I was gonna
and
say we
doing it,
did the worst.
and we were doing it by hand, feeding small square bales the best we could, and it was brutal. So just look at how hard it is. We don't have a bobsled and horses to hook up and load hay. We can't, we just can't do that, and most people can't. If we'd had a tractor available, we could have done something a little bit different, but it was so cold we couldn't get anything to even fire. So those are events that are not controlled by anything. But the point is, it takes that energy to be able to make that happen. And we can't do anything without it. So when you have those increased costs again that you don't control, you can't say, oh, this overhead, I don't need this, or I only need so much. You've got to keep those wheels turning, and that's the minimum. You're not wasting fuels. You're not driving around just for the heck of it. You're trying to be as efficient as you can. And I showed you how my little skid that I built for the square bales, how I'm hauling 2 bales at a time on that, just like you would 2 round bales on a without that on there, like a regular bed and you can't get 3 no matter what you do. So I'm being as efficient as possible, and we're still losing. So I can remember the 70s when I was a kid and how tough it was to make money in the cattle business. We had some good years in there. However, that shows you how much more they were making
Right.
per that amount of money. And this was the early 70s. It was the late 70s when the inflation really started, mid to late 70s when the inflation really took off. So, um, those dollars were different, but still the same trajectories.
I'm looking up real quick inflation calculator. Um, just by year real quick because we said the break even is 138 and some change, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna change it to 2014 real quick to 2023, and I'm gonna say I'll just say 138 because it said that. So calculate that. So just based off of from 2014 to now, let's say we're gonna use the same numbers Iowa State said for breaking even for an animal per 100 pounds. So for 100 weight, you get $138.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying in 2014, if we would have taken that $138 this year, we should receive at minimum to break even $173.54 to make it. And that's a 25.8% rate of inflation for 8 years. I'll give you some, benefit of the doubt. 2014, 2023, that's 9 years, but okay, 1 year difference. But that's how massive that's changed, and we're not anywhere near that rate right now. We are
but you got to sort of remember 2014 was a record year.
right.
So you're basing that off of a record year, and now we're having record years the other direction.
Yeah.
We're still high, but we're still at deficits. So, I mean, again, like the old man said, statistics are like a bikini. What they reveal is interesting, but what they hide is vital.
Right.
And so it all depends on how you want to use these statistics to show what you've got going. And people like Vilsack will say, "Oh, well, we've got some issues," but the things are coming around. They're blatantly lying. They're choosing and picking and cherry picking statistics that they want.
I was gonna say that particular statement isn't necessarily a lie, but it's definitely not accurate because we are coming back around, but back around to where we were to begin with. That's the problem. And where we were to begin with is still 9 years, 8 years behind where we're at now. So again, we're talking about less and less money on yesteryear's numbers.
That's still a deficit over time.
Right. Right.
You've got to be able to do better to make that up to get to zero.
Right.
There's two different zeros. And again, it's okay, are we back to where we were when we were still losing less money? Or are we back to zero where we've recouped all that money we lost? Those are two completely different things.
Well, and a great example of that too is what in 1923, and this is before the depression hit, right? You're talking 6 years before depression starts to hit. What could you buy with $1 in 1923 versus what can you buy with $1 today? And that's what we're looking at. Not quite the expansive difference, but there is that difference, and that's what we're trying to explain with even a few years. And if we're going back to, instead of having 60 cents in our pocket we have for the last few years, now we're going back to $1. Yeah, but again, it's $1 from 1923. That's what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, and you got to remember that even at that time in the 20s, early 20s, late teens, early 20s, we're coming out of World War One, and we were in a horrible depression at that point as well. And it wasn't until
it's like I want to say 24 to 29 was the roaring 20s, right?
Coolidge Silent Cal was the vice president for, I keep wanting to say Hoover, and it wasn't Hoover. He was in the 30s. He was after Coolidge, who was
just looking up the roaring 20 timeline here. Yeah, it says a timeline. They're counting 1920, but that's dumb because 1920 was also when Prohibition began, so nobody was excited then. Yeah, it's not giving me a quick hard. Sorry, folks. I'm trying to get a good one.
Oh God, I can't think the president. Anyway, they did all the things that governments shouldn't do. If you don't want to make money, they cut taxes. I think that the income tax rate under Wilson was like 70 some percent. It was insane. And they made the halving of government spending. They chopped it in by tens and 20s of percents up to half, 50% of the spending, reduced individual income, and that's what caused the roaring 20s. People had money to spend on their own and spurred the economy.
That makes sense.
But he wasn't in office very long. He died, and then Calvin Coolidge, was installed as the president and continued those policies. And then after that was, Hoover. Then we had the Great Depression because of all of the shenanigans there.
Yeah. I'll move on to, we kind of went through some of the initial takes, but we'll talk about those hard stats you alluded to. I'll start with my fifth source that I grabbed. I have them numbered 1 through 6, folks, but the United States and Brazil and China, all three, accounted for 51% of the world's beef production in 2022. Again, United States accounted for 21% of that, with it being, if I can remember, let me open this picture up a little bit real quick, 21.59% to be exact. And I want to assume this is pounds, but I'm not entirely sure, so I'm not going to say it, but it was whatever the number was. It said 2022 had 28,263,228,400. I think that was pounds. Maybe it was
Probably tons. Could be
tons. Yeah, I'm not sure. But then the other part that's coupled with that, coming directly from USDA.gov under cattle and beef, and it says sector at a glance. I was looking at it. I thought I'd use some more information from there, but really it was all just very generic stuff. If you're interested in what the cattle and beef industry do, it's just some very fact-based stuff. But the first two lines are in quotes. Cattle production is the most important agricultural industry in the United States, consistently accounting for the largest share of total cash receipts for agricultural commodities. In 2022, cattle production is forecasted to represent about 17% of the $462 billion in total cash receipts for agricultural commodities. And that was last updated in September of 2022.
Okay. At what point are they counting those dollars? Are they counting them at what stage? The local family ranch or at the packer?
I would imagine it's the packer, because that's where you can easily grab
That's
those
where you get your
macro
retail
numbers, right?
Right.
It's
Exactly.
easiest to
So,
conglomerate.
which again is skewed.
Yeah. No, I agree. And then it said beef exports in 2021 reached a new record in 3.4 billion pounds, an increase of more than 16% from 2020. The main reason for the rise was nearly a fourfold increase in exports to China, growing from just over 100 million pounds in 2020 to 540 million in 2021. And with China relaxing more COVID restrictions now, finally, after 3 years, they're looking to supposedly have more exports to China in 2023 as well, but we'll see. Again, that's a soft, pump your brakes there, but we'll see.
So it sounds like those are all pounds that they're dealing with originally instead of tons. But
that was a different source, so I can't necessarily.
Yeah,
it did come from the USDA, but
okay.
It was beeftolive.com versus USDA.gov. So, it's kind of hard to.
I can remember about 4 or 5 years ago, they were talking about negotiation with China, and they were going to take a pile more imports of our beef, and it really didn't happen. And now this last year they did, but why? What cuts were they? What exactly are they importing? Do we know? When they say beef products, are we sending over bones? Are we sending over hides? What are we sending?
See, that's good questions.
Yeah, you assume that it's and I just hate this term. When they talk about protein, again, you're starting to cleanse a language, and because you're talking beans,
the concept
protein,
of like
right?
greenwashing too, right? We're finally sustainable and stuff like that. These are all things we've always been. We're getting hip with the times, and we're using the verbiage that everybody else around us does. So yeah, we are sustainable. Yes, we are grass fed. Those are I'm with you.
Well, somebody wants to, if you want to take advantage of something of a moment and someone else's effort, what they've done, you just claim it as your own and call it something different. And that's a lot of what we see, it's exasperating at best, but it's, we're seeing it so much in our USDA, the market controls. I mean, all of your lobbyists, how they speak and what they say, isn't necessarily what they are really telling you. It's again, word speak and wanting you to think one thing when it's something else. I have to assume that we're sending meat over there, but it could be other products. Who knows?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking of you're using talking about words, just a couple of things that came off my mind. We are a free range, grass fed, grain finished, ethically raised red Angus cattle protein based supplement producing range. That's what you can honestly say. Like all of that is 100% true from us, but it all goes back to the zing words,
right?
That help with that.
Yeah, and that stuff just drives me crazy.
Oh, it does me too. But we'll get to the supply and demand. So this came from the Farm Bureau. And it was actually dated for 24 May 2022. So we're looking about 7 months ago. And it said, the 22 cattle prices are higher than 2021, but again, coming in at 140 pounds roughly per hundredweight, which is 17.5% above the year before in terms of prices. We're still not seeing that because of the inflation and the higher input costs in 2022. They moved on and said supply versus inventory. Last January of 2020, which was 2022, inventory estimates were 2% down from 2021. And I guarantee going into 2023, they're probably even lower than that, which drove the prices upward because it continues to kill the ranches in the U.S. through culling. We have to cull continuously to make it through the drought and the increased inputs. And that's where the steer and heifer slaughters were down, but the cow slaughters, the older cows, increased by 7%. That's a huge margin from year to year.
And that's not to increase the genetics of your herd.
No.
That is to be able to survive your overhead costs. Yep. That's a huge difference. That's the difference between growth and shrinkage.
No, I agree. And that's what my point was too, is we may be getting higher prices for these cows and stuff, cows and heifers, your breeding stock, but that's going to result directly in a lowered inventory of herds across the United States. And that's where the supply and demand aspect comes in. There's going to be less and less supply, and so your demand's going to continue to stay where it's at currently for now. But with increased prices on everybody except us, that demand may decrease, and therefore your inventory may even continue to just keep diving until we find somewhere to finally float and stay stable.
Well, and for those people that are like the plant-based analogy, our cows are like the plant, and the heifers and bull calves that are produced off of them are like the fruit. And then you take some of those heifers and you put them back into your herd. That's the seed from that fruit to continue the cycle. If you kill the plant, you get rid of those old cows, you've got no fruit and you've got no seeds. Now what?
Right. No, exactly. Moving to cattle on feedlot numbers. So where everybody sends their cows eventually just before slaughter and they get fattened and ready for butchering, were lower in 2022 than 2021. A lot of it, they said, is attributed to the drought due to 50% of the plains or the American West being unusable or in poor condition due to that drought. Additionally, the per capita demand for red meats and poultry has declined. That's not a shocker to me. If you look at prices in the grocery store, everybody will probably agree with you on that. That does not surprise me at all. It's been like that for the last 5 years. It continues to increase.
Your dollar has to stretch even more.
Yep. And the other thing too, I looked in the store yesterday, and what was it? I think it was just it was stew meat. That's what it was. It was hunks of stew meat, which normally are kind of almost to an extent rejects. It's just, hey, whatever's left up, you take the chunks and you can put it into a stew.
Or you take those same pieces of trim and put them into and you grind hamburger.
Right.
That's all it is.
Exactly. It's all usable, but
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just not necessarily the most desired cut, like a
Right.
ribeye or a T-bone or a sirloin.
Typically
That
tougher.
that package, I'm just gonna assume it was probably a pound, maybe a little more. It was $6.58 for that, I think. And that's for stew meat. I was like,
Mhm.
goodness gracious, no wonder nobody wants to eat that or eat beef right now because it's too expensive. I
Well,
can't understand.
well, I think one of the comments in one of the sources you had there was that people are they're still buying beef. Their numbers are up, but they're buying lower quality cuts.
Right. So it's gone from what's the most? It's choice, right? No, choice is the lowest to select.
Prime to choice to select. Select is
I'm
just
actually reading a book right now, by the way, folks, that we're gonna have a discussion about fake foods. The way we grade our foods is ridiculous. Like that's why even I'm in this industry and I still forget what the ranking is because it's not an easy 1 to 10, 1 being the best or 10 being the best and the opposite being vice versa. But we do things like that and it confuses people.
Yeah. Well, is that marketing? Yeah, I don't know. Here's my point. If you're buying a really good cut, let's say your better cuts that most people think are really good, and they are, steaks. Everybody likes a
Mhm.
steak, we think. If you're biased like I am, you like a steak. If you're really biased and have really good taste in your meats, you want a rib steak. Other people don't have quite the taste I've got. They like a T-bone. That's okay. It's the next cut. But you know what? As you move further back on that animal and you start taking sirloin, that's a little less desirable piece of meat. And you take your roast, your round steaks and rump roasts, those are not desirable, but they're more affordable. Well, when you produce a cow or say a steer, just call it a beef for butcher, you're not producing all sirloins out of that or all ribs.
Right.
You're producing everything. So what happens to those larger cuts or those better cuts? You can't afford them. What happens with them?
They either become hamburger because it's cheaper,
Why would you do
or
that?
people start lowering their quality of how they create their animal and
There you go.
grow them out, and then
That
you have less quality beef. Yeah.
you got less quality beef because people can't afford it. So it's like, why even produce a good animal because people
Yeah.
aren't going to buy it anyway. I'm not going to get money for it. I'm not
Right.
going to get my efforts are not going to be rewarded.
Yep.
So you've got that end of it as well. And we want people to eat beef every meal. You know, in 2014, when there
Right.
were record prices, I mean, we'd never seen prices like that. And I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. I wish it was like this every year. And that was no further out of my mouth. I thought, oh, that's
Yep.
not quite what we want because if we do that, we'll price ourselves out of a market where people can't afford to feed us or for
And
us to feed them and vice versa. I mean, just because we produce something doesn't mean we can eat. You
well,
know,
and
we
that's
have to sell that product to be able to eat back as well.
you bring a great point though, because I want people to have steak and eggs for breakfast. I want them
Absolutely.
to have a hamburger for lunch, and then I want to finish with a amazing steak dinner every day. That would be
Yep.
fantastic. Well, absolutely wonderful because they'd be constantly eating beef, and we want it to be affordable.
Right.
And I think where people misunderstand us is we're not looking to get more higher and higher prices necessarily out of the animals, which we are based off of inflation. I want it to increase with inflation. That's all I'm saying.
Got to I'd rather have the inflation go down, the cost go down.
Well, yeah, but that's economically, it's literally not feasible. But
Oh, it will
the
be at some point. It'll crash.
I'm going to tell you, like economically, a healthy economy inflates anywhere between 2.5 to I think it's 3.2%
Yes,
annually.
but that's
But
minimum. That's a
yes,
moderate increase. Correct.
but I want the prices to increase with that inflation, right? A moderate inflation. However, I also want things like, I don't know, 90% or 90 cents on the dollar versus 39. I want 85 cents on the dollar versus 35. I'd rather have that getting more for what we're producing than to continue to be squeezed on both ends for the producer
You
and the
know,
consumer.
and that brings up a good point about the way we change and kind of to change gears a little bit, but not is that we've started to produce our own beef for direct sales.
Right.
Not everybody can afford that. Not everybody can store that amount of meat. And that's really the only reason you do that and the only clientele you have or enough people, even if you know you have 8 people split a beef, that's an eighth of a beef a piece. Even that's quite a bit of meat to have to
Mm-hmm.
put into storage and keep it cold, keep it frozen. So you have a limited clientele that can afford to do that. And most people, most of the ones we deal with take either a whole or a half, but they've got the ability to freeze it. In large cities, I don't think you've got that room to do that. I've not lived in a large city, but from some of the things I hear and people's experiences is that if you've got a 500 to 800 square foot apartment in a large city like New York, that's a pretty decent sized place on average. That's nothing.
Well, and it's not only that,
Where
you
do you
have
put
to
that?
also take into account that where do most people put their freezers? It's probably going to be a garage. It's off to the side in the garage. In a larger city, a lot of times you don't have your own
You don't have
garage. You
that,
have a
right?
parking garage, and that's pretty much it.
Well, and my understanding is a lot of times in the larger cities, most people go down and they purchase their food for a day or two
Right.
in advance because it's like that's part of your daily routine is to go grab something at the store for food for supper that night. So, I mean that occurs as well. Now, where I was headed with that is our sales to people direct, where we're not sending them to anybody else. We are finishing them on grass or fattening them on grass, finishing them on grain, or we'll do a grass fat for somebody if that's what they specifically want. But our increase from that 39%, I haven't done the numbers on it, but I will bet you because we still have money into that to finish that animal, we're probably up there. We're lucky to be at about 45, 48% on the dollar. Still
Yeah.
less.
I'm trying to come up with something real quick here. 2,500. Let's say $2,500 for a 760-pound steer, which we discussed earlier. Oh, okay. All right, folks. Here's some math for you. We can break even, according to Iowa State. We can break even with, let's say, $140 for 100 weight,
Per
right?
100 weight. Per 100 weight.
So,
Yep.
all right. So 140 times 760 is actually, sorry, I take that back. 1.40 or 1.40 times 760 is $1,066. That's for us to make.
But you got to remember
even.
that's I don't think you're finishing that to that 760 pounds. You're finishing that to a 1,400-pound critter most generally.
You're probably right. So let's say we'll
1,250 to
take that.
1,400.
We'll take that and just double it real quick, an easy one. So you're looking at a 2,100 pound animal. If you
That's too much. That's too big. That's
or
inefficiency.
sorry, it's 1,400 pound animal, but it's a
There you go.
$2,100
There you
animal
go.
is what it is. Yeah,
There we go.
a $2,100 animal. That's break even overall, right? If a family were to pay 2,500 for beef for family, let's say a family of 4, 2,500 divided by 4 is 625 divided by 365. You're looking at $1.71 a day for a whole beef if you were to get it for bottom price like that.
Well, that's the break even point. That's where you got to get. But if you're trying to make more, which we are trying to make a little bit more, it's not much more than that. You're looking I think 2,800. It was like 20 just under $3,000 for the beef we were selling, but we were giving them more, but we were giving them the cost and passing on basically the cost for us to finish. That's the cost of doing business. And then we paid for the processing, which is part of it as well. So yeah, it's a even with that, not necessarily a winning proposition. You're just losing less.
Well, and again, the
But
other
your
thing
labor's
is,
there.
but I've also brought up before, you might look at overall cost, and let's say, especially now, geez, Louise, looking at that stew meat and seeing $6+, and again, I'll just assume it was a pound, $6+ for that one tray. Let's say you take that, and let's just say you pay $6 all around per pound of this animal, which you never would with us. It's not going to be that expensive, I promise you. You pay $6 per pound for the animal that we produce for you. You're paying $6 for a prime cut of a ribeye, or holding it all together. And guess what? You paid $6 a pound for a prime rib roast for Christmas or New Year's or a special occasion. You're paying also $6 for ground beef, the most bare minimum cut that you can get, and that's where it becomes way more affordable for the consumer for sure. And for us, if we're getting out of that particular circumstance, we're getting not 39 cents, we are closing in on the 85 to 90 cent mark per dollar, because obviously there's a little bit that's going to go to the processor, our butcher. There's going to go a little bit to fuel costs and so on to deliver or to get it shipped to the producer or the consumer, sorry. But we are closing in on that becoming more profitable for us and less wrench in your pocket for the consumer. So I think that's why I keep saying I think this is becoming more and more of a grassroots thing, and I think particularly
and that does
2020 was a year
fluctuate
that
a
kind of
little
brought
bit.
that up. But
Yeah, and your costs are per pound is just a hair bit more than that for the consumer direct to or from us to them, but it also depends on the size of the animal, right? I mean,
right,
so and we cut that a little bit because we try to make it affordable for someone to buy an entire half or an entire whole. We're not taking the animals up to 1,400 pounds. We're getting them just over 1,000, 1,100 pounds, and which makes a lot of difference in the weight of bone and hide. So we weigh it, do it on, and the hide you're not counting that anyway, but certainly your bone structure in there is counted on because it's a carcass weight is what we base that on. So you're going to have bones in your steaks, and some of your roasts may have it depending on the cut of the roast. So it's still cost effective for us to fatten that animal a little bit sooner, and for somebody to buy that as a little smaller animal. I think the meat taste is better. Cuts are a little bit nicer, a little bit more tender, less bone that you're paying for. There's lots of little benefit there to them doing it in that manner. Now we can also hold that animal for another 6 months, and then you've got another couple 100 pounds on them at nearly a full size, and then pay a little bit more, but it's overall it's the cost per pound is essentially the same, but we got more into them too. So it's just
right.
whether you want bigger steaks or a lot more of it, or smaller earlier on. So it's about preference, and that's why we're doing it. It's customizing to what somebody wants.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, is it can be so customized for them.
Mhm.
The thing I want to get your kind of your input on, because I think we talked about it a little bit, but I'd like to get more of maybe your analysis of this, and I'll throw both of them out there. It's the imports and exports. According to, let me make sure I'm citing this source correctly. It was my fourth source, the Farm Bureau, titled from May of 2022, Cattle Supply and Demand Issues for the 2022 Marketing Year. So they were looking still, we've got 6 months to go left in the year. Here's where we're at. Assuming these numbers held out for the rest of the year, they said for imports, there was 29% increase in imports, mostly from Brazil. And I brought up the issue with the mad cow disease. Even Canada shut them down, but we continued to bring them in. Yep. The other thing was, one reason being that the US dollar strength increased, which is good for our economy for sure. I'm not going to say that. But because of that, it made it cheaper to import. It's just you can get more with our dollar by importing stuff rather than exporting. Vice versa, because our dollar was so much stronger, people did not necessarily, or nations did not necessarily want to export as much from us because it cost them more to export from us and import to them. For the export portion, while the exports were above average, they still fell almost 2% at 1.8% from early 2022. So earlier in the year, it was probably a 3 or 4 month difference. And then China's COVID policies, I said, also, might have been possible for part of the export decreases, but slowly looking at continued increases in the future. But we'll see. With all of that said, the three leading nations for U.S. exports in 2022 were Asian nations of all: China, South Korea, and Japan. So I kind of thought, what were your inputs on that? What did you think of those statistics, if they were accurate and so on?
Well, and I don't know, both Japan and Korea's are not huge land masses.
No, they're
And
not.
there's a lot of manufacturing in both of those countries, South Korea particularly. We're not talking North Korea here. I think we need to be plain about that. I don't think
Right.
we're doing much trade with North Korea, but Japan has a lot of manufacturing, and I know they've got some agriculture there, but I don't know, per capita how much they really export. I don't think of them as a huge export nation in a lot of agriculture. They do. I know there are some beef they do, but China, with the landmass they have, I can see that they would do that.
Well, and what's crazy too is if somebody explained this to me, somebody I work with who worked over in Korea one time, they explained to me that China actually, as big of a landmass as they are, they're like, hey, look at the like the satellite image of China. I'm like, okay. Like, trust me, just humor me. I looked at it and they're like, see all this? And it was the desert part of the is it the Gobi. There it is. The
Gobi
Gobi
Desert.
part
Yeah.
that most of Mongolia is in.
Mhm.
It takes a good portion out of China, and the western portion of China, there's not a lot there. And it's crazy that
Right.
as big of a landmass as China is, it really doesn't have that much agricultural world either, because most of the
Right.
cities are on the coast as well, which would
Right.
be what people would normally lead to as the fertile countries, or fertile lands of the country. And so it's kind of amazing that they do produce as much as they do for various things within agriculture as they
Well,
do for
yeah,
lack of
well,
ability
and
to
if
do
you
it.
look at a lifestyle kind of as an aside, look at the Mongolian people, how they live.
Oh,
Like, what the
rough.
hell do they eat?
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
they live literally
they're
off
one
American
step
milk.
away from still Genghis Khan and his clan back in the
Yes,
early years.
and not a step away. They're still doing it. Just time has caught up with them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so yeah, your point to that the production from the ground is minimal, um, weather-wise and just terrain. But still, China's a huge landmass, and I think that they could probably produce more. They've got a lot of people. What they got 25% of the population of the
Yeah,
planet.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so they got a huge population in a huge landmass. But here's one problem: anytime, and I don't mean to get political about it, but anytime that you have no incentive for personal gain, you're gonna have much output.
Right.
You're gonna just take care of yourself. You're gonna survive, and if the state gets the rest, what am I gonna do?
Right.
So you really are a slave nation in a way, where that's why we are some of the best producers in the world, because we get to supposedly um, bear the fruits of our labor. And not always is that happening, and again, partially because we're controlled, but we're a hell of a lot better off than they are over there as an individual or as a family trying to run something. So that production, yeah, they might produce something, but I think that's a swapsy type thing for politics. They're going to import some of our beef, and then they're going to export some of their beef. And it's like,
Right.
okay, we just burned a bunch of fuel crossing some oceans to do this. For what purpose?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, things are just backwards that way, and it boggles my mind. It makes no good sense to do those sorts of things, uh, especially when all things are equal. Why would you do it? What's the point?
No, I agree. I mean, if you want to trade beef for water chestnuts because we can't produce those,
That's one
but
thing.
China can, that's one
Yeah.
thing, absolutely. But to literally go a swapsies, like you said, for Chinese beef to American beef, and
Yeah.
that's it, like that makes no sense to me.
Well,
Unless
and
it's something like Japan where it literally makes Wagyu and Kobe beef. That's a little different because it's raised
specialized, right?
especially, yeah, it's
Mhm.
specialized. But I mean, in the United States, we only get like 53 pounds of Kobe beef a year.
Well, and that's why they held on to those genetics in those animals so much.
Right.
They did not want to let those go
Right.
uh, for that. Well, and it's the same thing. I have no problem sending a bunch of beef over there if we get a bunch of bamboo raw materials back to make flooring, for
Right.
instance. So, I
That's
mean, that's
trade.
just your both of your own natural resources trading for somebody else's natural resource.
Right.
Or, so yeah, I've got no issue with that, but it makes no sense to me to trade beef for beef. I just as soon eat our own beef. and supply
Let's
that to the people of our nation, because we know it's the safest beef supply or meat supply in the world.
let's go to something. We'll move to bioproducts because I would like to start wrapping it up here. Well, it's not going to be quick anytime soon, but kind of start getting towards the end here.
So don't go away. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, don't go away. So from December 20th of 2022, so it's a mere 3 weeks ago, the USDA had a weekly bulletin, and it was titled, actually provided by Mom. She gave it to me. It's fantastic. It's a USDA invests $9.5 million to develop new bioproducts from agricultural commodities. Again, this is where those three, let's say, concerning quotes came from that I provided. But the three awardees that they had were the Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University was number one. The University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign was two. And then it looks like Soy Innovations out of Ames, Iowa. And I'll tell you what those three were. For Virginia, they said it was a project to convert food waste into biodegradable PHA. It's a big long word that I can't say, so sorry, peeps. But PHA-based bioplastics that can be used for a variety of consumer plastics, including flexible and rigid packaging and containers for food and beverages. Fantastic. Love it. I love to see it. I think that's great. An even more efficient way to, expand what we already produce and use more of it without using, I think, petroleum-based products. I'm always a supporter of that. The second was Illinois Urbana-Champaign had a project that proposed converting swine manure and other organic feedstocks into biobinders for asphalts that increase the quality of recycled asphalt pavements. So the converting swine manure and other organic feedstocks into biobinders, that one I was a little concerned about. Having read it a second time, maybe it's not as bad, but the use of swine manure, I thought it sounded like a biobinder for food, and maybe that's not the case. I think it was the manure and other organic feedstocks used to be biobinders. So that makes me feel better, because always using manure for another feed is never, in my opinion, a good thing. But that's better because you can use it for asphalt. Then the third one, a project from Soy Innovations out of Ames, Iowa, to transform high oleic soybean oil into thermoplastic rubber for pavements that has a potential to extend repair longevity for existing surfaces. Low-cost paving solutions are particularly important in rural and underserved communities where road paving and maintenance budgets are underfunded due to a reliance on local tax revenues. So those were the three things. I just wanted to see what you thought. I thought overall they were good ideas, but
well, they're great ideas, but guess what? I used to make asphalt.
Yeah.
I know a little something about PMA instead of PHA. I'm not sure, but I believe it was polymer acid. It was a polymer that was added to asphalt as you're making it, batched in to make it a little bit more forgiving, so it didn't break. It was basically a polymer to help in just what they're saying there. And guess what? Didn't work for shit. So they within a few short years of them making that, they mothballed the equipment and quit making it. In fact, is they had a pump because the stuff is environmentally, should we say, not desirable. There was a tank with this stuff in it that was melted, that they kept hot with a steam coil and run in through a pump and pumped back into the tank. Continually ran for years doing this because they couldn't get rid of the stuff, didn't know what to do with it. So you just keep it moving so it doesn't set up. Same kind of things. I mean, here's the bottom line on that. Who does that benefit? It's not going to benefit your producer. It's going to benefit, again, your end of under the line persons or corporations. In other words, the packers are now going to get rid of some of their entrails, bones, whatever,
Right.
to a different source, just another source. They're still getting rid of them, probably pennies on the dollar, or any of the waste stuff that they don't have, that they've got a market that's harder to ship to because it costs more
or they
money.
would otherwise get fined for EPA violations. Yeah.
Right. So it's a good use of stuff, but it's still it's your end of the line service person no, I shouldn't say person, I mean a corporation is what I mean when I say person,
Yeah.
like your Packers and stuff that are still going to get that, and they're going to just make more off of that. You're not going to
Yeah.
see that in the increase in the cost of your animal going to them and in your pocket. Not going to happen.
No, I agree. Ultimately, I think good for expanding the use of what we already do with the remains
Yeah,
of animals. But
as long
no,
as
I
it's
agree.
feasible and it works. Because anytime you put that in some kind of a spending bill in Congress, it's usually a BS deal. It's a pork that is not going to work. We've already
Yeah.
realized in these northern climates where we need a little bit sometimes softer asphalt because it can't take the cold. It still didn't work. So
Yeah.
we're gonna redo this. We're gonna lay this stuff out on some highways, and it's gonna waste a bunch of money again.
Moving to the NCBA
And
before
one
I
one
get
last
to
thing, I don't
oh
see
sure.
I don't see bio anything that's a natural thing from an animal having the durability that you have when you have a natural thing out of a fossil fuel. Could, but I don't. I find it hard to believe
Sure.
that that would have the shelf life
Right. No,
in
you're
actual use.
it makes sense. The NCBA said that they have priorities for the 2023 Farm Bill as we've come to become more enlightened. The the lack of faith I have in this organization, but we will continue anyway. For the 2023 Farm Bill, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, their CEO, said some things that were just plain irritating to me because he said things that are what I would tell you, and he just happens to have a platform because he's a CEO and people think he's a genius. And it's like, no, he's not. He's saying the exact same thing me and thousands of other ranchers are saying. It's just that you guys happen to pay attention to what he says and write it in an article. I digress. He said,
I think 49% of those folks around him probably don't think he's a genius because it was 51% that voted him into that.
you're probably right.
So you know how that goes.
The I'll just kind of write out or say the notes I have because I'm just irritated with NCBA overall. I said their priority for the 2023 Farm Bill is to fund and improve risk management tools like livestock risk protection and pasture range forage insurance that, quote, allows producers to manage risk and be profitable. Woodhull, I don't know his full name. I didn't care to even find out. He says there's a lot of talk about sustainability, but sustainability starts with all of you. If we can't keep you on the land, then the rest of the discussion makes no difference whatsoever. We have to keep you there, and that means risk management. Listen, what you're saying is absolutely 100% true, but are you going to follow through with it? And that's the
How are you going
problem.
to do
Is
that? How are you going to
these are
do that?
these are the organizations that I have issues with because they're a wolf in sheep's clothing, honestly.
Yeah, I call them cheerleaders.
Yeah, you know what? The NCBA probably would be better for cheerleaders, but the problem is they've taken part of things that have slowly disintegrated the beef industry as well. So it's hard to take their word
Right.
at
It's been
all with
a lot of times it's self-serving.
right. Now, he said there were three other things that they're looking to do in the upcoming legislative issues. And I'll say what they are: the Grassley Fisher bill, the Meatpacking Special Investigator Act, and the new WOTUS rules. So I'll start with the Grassley Fisher Act. Grassley Fisher. Yeah, Grassley Fisher. Woodall says the NCBA is working close with House and Senate lawmakers. Oh boy, this is going to be interesting, especially after seeing the House Speaker debacle the last 3 or 4 days. But from both
15 rounds.
parties, oh jeez, from both parties to stop the bill from allowing too much government interference in the cattle and beef markets. The current bill, he says, is a one size fits all and doesn't take into account that the agriculture in states like Kentucky and Indiana is different than agriculture in Kansas or California. You're absolutely right. Are you going to follow through with it? That's the question. The next thing, the Meatpacking Special Investigator Act. The NCBA is working against legislation that would install a special investigator at the USDA to enforce Packers and Stockyards Act. NCBA is pushing for USDA to fully staff the division instead of creating a new special investigator position. 100% agree. Again, one of the few times I'd say actually expanding the government would be a good thing. but that's where it'd be beneficial.
Be careful what you ask for.
I know,
But
I know.
remember what I said a couple years ago, and when they talked about the country of origin labeling and how they're
Yeah,
going to have some investigators do that and some people
yeah.
that are going to be oversight. It didn't happen. I said it wasn't going to happen then. It didn't. And you take one person, or even let's say you take 1,000 people, and you create positions as a division. How effective do you think, and how much ground do those people have to cover?
No, I agree. I mean, it's gonna have to be a lot. What I would honestly like to see is I'd like to see, if we're being real here, if we made a division like that, I'd like to see 50 investigators, one for a state, and whatever territory is required as well. So 50 plus whatever, like DC stuff like that. But those, like, DC's not cattle producing, so I don't need that one. Like so on and so forth. If it's not cattle producing, then don't do it. That makes sense. But and then have a manager or the head of that division. So you're looking at less than 60 people probably. That I would have no problem with, but to go more than that is a little ridiculous.
Well, and are they really going to enforce? What are they going to enforce? How are they going to do it? You got to have
Well, it's
teeth into
a good
these
question
things.
too. No, I
You
agree.
know, I mean,
Yeah,
I've lost faith in that entirely.
yeah. I mean, we've been talking about this for two
Again,
years now. I thought we had traction in 2020, but
yeah,
nope.
no, it's. I remember I was the one who said, wait, you'll see, nothing will happen."
Yeah, and you're right.
Again, cheerleading. It's
Yeah.
cheerleading.
No, in that
You people
particular
just keep
circumstance,
producing.
100%.
Keep producing. We need you to produce. You do this better than anybody.
Yep.
Keep going.
Yep.
I don't.
No,
Oh,
I
you're
agree.
going broke? Well, just try harder.
Yeah. The last one, new WOTUS rules.
Waters of the
NCBA is,
United States. Yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say NCBA is tracking a rewriting of the waters of the United States, or WOTUS, rules that imposed regulations on small waterways and water features on private farmland. Rewriting of that sounds good. I
What
don't
does
know
that
if that
mean?
means good. Yeah,
Exactly. Rewriting it in which direction?
exactly. Is it gonna hurt
Because
us
that
or
was
help
done
us?
with, yeah, that was done by the Obama administration, and ultimately got themselves slapped because it was unconstitutional, if I recall correctly, parts of it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you want to talk about the forefront of water protection and water conservation and carrying
And
it.
water seizing control of water.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but water safety, because it's for people downstream as well. Believe it or not, look at places like Montana. It's literally in our constitution.
Right.
It's kind of important to us because we realized early in 1889 that water was going to be very vital in this
Yep.
part of the nation, and it still is today, over 100 years later.
What's that old saying?
Water's life.
Water's for fighting, whiskey's
Oh
for
yeah.
drinking.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. All right, now for the last part that I really wanted to cover, because this is where I stood with my stance at the final um state of the industry. I said we've got what exactly did I say? Three assessments: foes of the beef and ranch industry, where the industry is moving, and the industry state. I think we've kind of gone over the industry state
Well,
globally and
yeah.
domestically.
Okay, but domestically, we've got some big issues in Montana, and I think we've got big issues in other states. We just haven't quite seen them. There's a lot of control over BLM ground, Forest Service type leases in a lot of states that are very heavy to federally owned properties. You look at Nevada, Arizona.
Yeah.
Montana's got a good fair share of that, as well as Wyoming, and I think the Dakotas do to an extent. Idaho certainly, but um, you've got something that's hard to beat, because you got federal bureaucrats that dictate how that property can or cannot be used, and you're not going to fight the U.S. government. I mean, the supremacy clause says that their constitution trumps the
The state.
state constitutions.
Right.
So, um, but what is even more insidious, I think, is that we've got you talked about people moving into the state and how our population has increased, and we've got urban sprawl all over in this state.
Right.
Small, everybody's got a ranch now that's got 5 acres, so they think they're John Dutton.
Yeah.
And
Well, and that's a great example too, because we were talking to family friends over Christmas, and they're saying, Bozeman's so beautiful, I love that the Bozeman has the city ordinance that it can't be more than 3 or 4 stories of buildings. I'm like, I absolutely disagree. I mean, it's fantastic that people think that. And at one point in college, I thought it was great too, because in Bozeman, you can see all the mountains around you. It's literally surrounded by 352 degrees of mountains. There's only 8 degrees where it's not mountains, and it's through a pass. You can see it. And it's beautiful. It absolutely is. But now we're at the point where, because of, as an ag producer, we are sprawling so bad, specifically in particular, Bozeman is sprawling so badly that it's taking up some amazing farm and ranch ground. I'm absolutely against it. They need to lift that ordinance and start going up. If you don't want it to go up, then you need to buy the air rights to keep people from going up in the air and taking that view away, because you continue to go outward, you're not going to have production ground, and that will hurt us in the long haul. And I see it.
Well, that production's gone forever. They're
Right.
going to lift that asphalt.
It'll
That's
never
gone
come
forever.
back.
No,
right. Once it's
ever.
gone, it's gone.
Yep. It changes everything. Your water quality, your groundwaters, everything. It changes. The other thing, and I mean, that's happening all over the state, even in some of the small rural areas.
Right.
You've got a lot more people buying little sections of land, subdivisions going in. What used to be farms and ranches, 160 acres off of this section is going to be set aside, and now it's chopped up into 20 and 10 acre parcels.
Again, it all leads back to, because farmers and ranchers cannot afford not to sell, because they have to keep going.
Right. So the other portion of that is you've got, and this is not necessarily domestic, it affects us domestically, but it's an international push. And that is, as I think you put in the outline, the American Prairie Reserve.
Yep.
You've got wealthy.
It says American Prairie Reserve, but it is not backed by Americans for the most part. I will tell you that.
And it is not a prairie reserve. It is a playground for the rich. They want to put buffalo on that, restore it like it was 150, 200 years ago. But you're not going to be able to have any kind of production on beef in there. They say there is, but they slowly creep and encroach to where they get to use it and no one else does. And they actually had BLM decisions about taking fences out and allowing buffalo in there, and the BLM just folded over on them, let them have what they wanted. So you've got these large parcels of land that are being sold, and I'm talking tens of thousands of acres, ranches that they can't make it anymore. And so they're like the old movies you see with the unethical banker waiting for somebody to not be able to make their payments so they could run in there and scoop the ranch up or the farm up and take it from them, kick them off, and then use it for their own, whether it's the bank's benefit or their personal benefit. And this is the same way with the American Prairie Reserve. And it is insidious in how that's being done, because it is not controlled or desired by the majority of Montanans. It is people from another part of the world that have the money to push and to have straw buyers, and they're not even doing straw buyers anymore. They're just upfront about, this is American Prairie Reserve and this is what we want.
Well, and I'll tell you, it says, if you just look up financial backers, the American Prairie Reserve at top on Google, it says the reserve has since garnered. So this is an update of like what's going on from 2019. So we're looking a little over 2 years ago. The reserve has since garnered multi-million dollar donations from a German billionaire, heirs to the Mars Candy Company, and a handful of top executives in the finance industry, at least 2 of whom help steer big investments in oil, gas, and coal. And it's funny because once that ground, I think you said, is under the reserve, you'll probably never be able to hunt on there again.
Oh, God, you will
definitely never be able to pull or extract resources such as coal, natural gas, anything of that nature. Animals will go there, but then they will also buy, like we've said before, when people come into our state and they buy without seeing the land and they buy for exorbitant amounts of money, they will drive the property tax rate up, just like actually Yellowstone. The show Yellowstone actually shows a very good depiction of that. Those tax hikes will end up forcing ranchers that surround the American Prairie Reserve to fold, because they won't be able to afford the taxes for their land anymore. So it's very insidious. I agree with how you said that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that has happened. It continues to happen. It's been happening for a while.
Yeah.
So that land too is gone. It's like really it's a privately owned national park is what it amounts to.
Right.
That you can't
No,
get
it's
to
great.
use.
Right.
You don't get to set foot on there, you know.
The other thing, and we're going to make a small educational video about it, plant-based proteins. Oh my goodness. Of all the things, Dad knows how just passionate I am against plant-based proteins. And I'll be honest, folks, a sneak peek into what we ate. It wasn't horrible. I was pleasantly surprised.
We've had it before, I
Yeah,
believe.
we have. Believe it or not, I think we
Didn't
have.
know it. Didn't know it, but this confirmed it.
Yeah, this definitely did. I'll say it wasn't nice to my body. There were repercussions the next day for it.
Boy, were there.
Oh, I'm not kidding. I'm not trying to too much information or anything, but yeah, it was a rough, actually probably 48 hours. I'm not gonna lie. But I ate more than mom and dad did, which I think that's what we kind of based it off of, because that was the only difference in our diet. Was they had each a quarter of a patty and I had a patty and a half. And if a patty and a half did that, oh my goodness, I can't believe what. Yeah, but I mean, you've got beef packers, which leads to the next thing, the beef packer monopolies supporting this stuff. Some of them are going out of their way specifically saying they want to create this stuff so that they no longer have to use actual beef. They can just make it. Again, lab
Does that
based.
depress would that depress the beef market even more?
Gee, I'm sure it would. But it,
and then when I have a monopoly on another food source.
Right, exactly. But I mean, the thing is, when you're processing something literally within a lab, you're already using something and you're actually taking away from an industry already, which was the grains. You're cutting into that to make something that's meat like, and then the impacts it has on your body, which I said beforehand, but now experiencing in my personal, oh my goodness.
Well, that's short term. What's it do long term? What does it not
long term?
provide long term?
Is there carcinogens in it? Is it really good for your cholesterol and your heart disease?
The nutrients you need?
Do you have all the nutrients? Yeah, absolutely. I 100%
Vitamin
agree.
K is a very essential thing for blood clotting. You get that only through red meat.
Yeah. But I mean, those are things that I still see the APR and that. And then of course, as we've said before, the beef packer monopolies, those are all legitimately, I think they are foes of the beef industry. And then of course, with people moving in, I said that's a challenge. There's nothing you're going to be able to stop with that. And I don't think necessarily, as much as I dislike a lot of what we call transplants, I don't think all of them have the worst of intentions. A good portion of them do, unfortunately, and they bring those politics that they're escaping from and bring them with them to where we are, and that's going to significantly impact in the decades to follow. But more to see on that. I still think it's a challenge, not necessarily a foe, but the other three, the American Prairie Reserve, plant-based proteins, and beef packer monopolies are absolute foes. They're looking to specifically destroy us as an industry.
Well, and your point to people moving in and wanting a better life, I'm all for that. If anybody wants to go and better themselves, when you come to some place because it's desirable, because the quality of life that you can have, or it's better than the one you left, that's okay. That's fine. I've got no issue with that. But learn our ways, learn our customs, respect what we do instead of trying to turn it into the very place you just left.
Right. Yeah, I agree. The last thing I'll part with, again, we are part of the wave of direct beef to consumer sales. People are already contacting us. We've already got about 6 head for this upcoming year ready to
done. They're sold.
They're literally sold. Yep. They are sitting out there. They're eating and enjoying their life right now. And they are waiting until they're fat enough to go bye-bye and become T-bone. But we are excited to be part of that. We look forward to if you've seen any of our recent episodes, you'll see that is kind of our way forward, and it's also our way of combating some of these challenges and things that we have already outlined. But it's going to be interesting to see in the coming years how much of an impact this has globally and domestically, because as I said before, if anybody hasn't been paying attention, there are a lot of processing plants, butcher plants, specifically in Montana, that are coming up out of nowhere because butchers cannot keep up with this stuff. They just can't. They are not built for it. And so more and more producers, or actually more and more processors, are coming into the industry, at least locally. And it's going to be interesting to see how much that impacts. So I'm hopeful that it will impact in a good way and it will help producers and consumers alike, but only time will tell. So with that, we will finish this episode up with Dad's parting comments.
Well, all of this we've talked about is bottom line. It's what we can pay, what we can make, and we can't pay you much to watch, but we can sure thank you. And that's the only way we can do it till you're better paid.